Hey everyone. So considering the fact that the election is pretty close, and if you're watching this at the time I'm uploading it, I'm about 5 days away from the election, and considering that this election is one of the most, should we say, hotly contested elections that have probably happened in American history, one that is bringing up more animosity, bitterness, and argumentation than probably any other presidential election that we've seen, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about God and politics, or more specifically, how we as Christians can have peace in the face of this political climate that we find ourselves in, and how that could actually make us stand out from the ways that the people living around us are living. So in order to understand this, I'm going to go to a very famous Bible passage, Matthew chapter 22, specifically verse 21. And in this section, what's going on is Jesus is asked by a group of people whether or not it's lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. And Jesus very wisely and famously responds by holding up a coin and asking whose inscription is upon it. When they say Caesar's, Jesus' response is, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God the things that are God's." Now, in that very succinct statement, this is what Jesus is getting at. He's saying government in and of itself is not a wrong thing. That's why he says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Throughout the Bible, we have this view of government that it's actually a good thing. It's something that God established for mankind in order to be something that would be able to enforce morality and protect the rights and the livelihoods of individuals throughout the world. If you take away government, essentially what you have is you have an anarchy. You have people that are just going to form small bands and prey on the weak. And that's what we see happen. And any time we take away any type of central governance for mankind, you do see people acting in very strange ways. And all you have to do is look at when cultures and societies go into anarchist-like places. And you don't have to look too far if you're living in America right now. Whenever you see people acting in a way as if the government's not there, you see them acting in very violent and degrading ways. Not all people, but enough people are going to be acting in that way that it's going to be destructive for the people who just want to live at peace. So government is established to protect the rights of those individuals and to curb the bad impulses of those who would want to steal or destroy those rights. So government's a good thing, and because of that, Jesus says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. It's okay for us as Christians to be involved in politics. It's okay for us to give honor to politicians, honor to the government, to pray for them, which we're commanded to do, to pay taxes, as we're commanded to do, and to also be a part of the political process. And that means voting, and that means caring about who's in office. However, the main problem with humanity, as St. Augustine pointed out long ago, is not our desires. It's the fact that our desires are wrongly ordered. So let me give you an example. It's not wrong for me to love pleasure, right? Pleasure is a good thing. Pleasure is given to us by God. God is himself a pleasurable God and a pleasure-giving God. And that's why in 1 Timothy 4, verse 4, it says the creation is good and is meant to be enjoyed. For all things are created by God for our enjoyment, and it is set apart or made holy by the word of God and by prayer. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with loving pleasure. However, if I love pleasure, say, more than I love my marriage, or if I love pleasure more than I love my job, or if I love pleasure more than I love my family, I'm going to make a lot of selfish, ill-informed, and bad decisions that are going to be destructive for all of those things. I'm going to end up imploding my life, all because I loved pleasure more than I should have. So it's not that I shouldn't have loved pleasure, it's that I just should have loved it less than my family, my career, and my marriage. Now, when we look at politics, is it okay to love politics? Obviously. Once again, Jesus says that politics are good. It's good. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Paul in Romans 13, he talks about the goods of government. It's okay to like politics. It's okay to care about the government. However, when we make government an ultimate good, as opposed to just a somewhat good thing that God has established, then we get into trouble. And that's where you see all the incredible amounts of animosity, all the incredible amounts of fear and anxiety erupting in our culture right now. It's because we've taken something, the government, which is a good, and we've made it an ultimate good. And I'm going to just take 3 things that we've made the government our ultimate good in to show you just why it's mattering so much to people and why there is so much anxiety, there is so much panic, and there is so much anger in regards to the current election. So the first thing is morality. So if you're a religious person, if you believe in any type of religion, the primary place where you get your morality from is not your government, it's not your society, it's your religion. Right? And that's how humanity has existed for thousands of years. We have garnered the majority of our morality from our religious beliefs. The government, like I said, was just pretty much there to establish and to enforce the things that we already believed in intrinsically. It wasn't there to legislate morality or to tell us how we ought to live in that sense. It was there simply to say, if you step out of bounds, this is what's going to happen to you. That's really all that government was meant to do. If you get rid of God, though, all of a sudden, government not only becomes something that enforces morality, but it becomes something that creates morality. So therefore, when I'm voting, or if I'm in the political scene, I'm no longer voting for things saying like, hey, it's nice if the government lines up with my moral beliefs. Now it becomes an absolute necessity. If my moral beliefs aren't supported by the government, then all hell's going to break loose, the culture's going to go to hell, and I'm going to be going with it. I have to put ultimate significance on my voting. I have to put ultimate significance upon my politicians, because it becomes increasingly and increasingly important that my morality gets legislated. Otherwise, the culture is going to go away from what I want. And the more the culture goes away from what I want, the more I move away from the culture and become fearful of it, right? And that's what you see a lot of Christians doing. We'll talk more about that later. The second thing is security. Once again, for religious people, the majority of the place where they would find their security was not through their government or their society, it was through their religious beliefs. They believed there was a God out there that had a plan and purpose for all things. They believed that their lives were on a particular course that was set by this God, and that nothing could thwart his will. So because of that, no matter what the government was doing, they had a sense of peace about what was going on, right? But nowadays, again, if you remove God from that picture, if you remove God from the political landscape, all of a sudden you have to freak out, because the only amount of security that you're going to have is going to come through the government. So therefore, if your politician doesn't get elected, or if your policies don't get adopted, then your entire life is going to be on upheaval, and everything's going to go down, right? And the world's going to end, and it's going to stop spinning unless the person that you want gets into office. And that's how, again, you see a lot of people talking about this particular election. If this person doesn't get in, it all goes to hell. You know, it's all going to end if this person doesn't get elected, right? This kind of ultimate significance on something that shouldn't be ultimately significant, which leads to the final point, and that is significance and value. Particularly eternal significance and value. So once again, if you're religious, the majority of the place that you would get your worth and your value system was from your religious beliefs. You believed that God loved you and cared about you. You believe that you're serving him and loving him, and through your life choices and decisions, your basically eternal life would be secured in what you're doing in the here and now. So because of that, you have worth and significance through your relationship with God, and you also have eternal significance through what you're gaining in God, right? If you put God out of it, then again, the government and legislation becomes your ultimate place for your eternal value. So Ernest Becker, who's not a Christian, by the way, wrote a book called The Denial of Death, in which he argued that the majority of us are kind of petrified by the fear that one day we're going to die. And the way that we fight that fear is either A, by ignoring it, or B, by coming up with some sort of what he called an immortality project. And he said, if you're irreligious, if you don't believe in a God, the best place to become immortal or to have eternal significance, if you want to put it that way, was through gaining some sort of a legacy through political value or political acclaim. So in other words, the things that I fight for in policy and in government are going to be eternally significant, because they're going to be enjoyed by the legacy I leave behind. The people that come after me are going to live in the twilight or in the beauty of the things that I've created. So once again, it becomes incredibly significant that I get my views passed, because if I don't get my views passed, then once again, I feel insignificant, because the things that I feel like are going to give me my worth go by the wayside. So that's why you see people fighting so immensely and so incredibly in the particular election. That's why they're so angered and they're so furious with people who do not agree with them, because these things literally threaten their value system as a whole. They have to believe that their lives matter, not just for the here and now, but forever. They have to believe that they were the generation that got it right. They were the generation that brought about racial equality and social justice and all these other things. And if it doesn't happen from them, then they feel insignificant and without value or merit. Now, it's not too hard for us as Christians to look at these things and see how all of them are answered in God. And if they really are answered in God, then we shouldn't be living as if we don't have a relationship with God. And therefore, we should have incredible amounts of peace going into this current election. Not that, once again, we're not going to have any amount of anxiety or fear or any amount of desire to see particular politicians get into office. but it's not going to be ultimately significant to us, and therefore it's not going to threaten our identity, our security, or even our moral views or beliefs. Let's take the first one, for instance, moral beliefs. A lot of Christians, a lot of religious people are pulling away from the culture because they're like, oh, the culture is disgusting, it's gross, it's gone so far away from God, we live in a godless society, I don't even want to be a part of it, I don't want my kids to go to school, I don't want to be a part of what's going on around me. And because of that, they're not actually becoming evangelistic, they're becoming hermits, essentially. Now, look throughout culture, by the way, look throughout history. In the first century, when Christianity was started, they were a persecuted minority, meaning that the entirety of the Roman government, the entirety of the Roman culture, which is the prevailing culture of the time, was adamantly opposed to Christianity in every conceivable way. They had a different view of marriage, they had a different view of sexuality, they had a different view of what it meant to treat people correctly, equality, racial equality, gender equality. They had radical different views from what the Christians believed, and that's why the Christians were persecuted so adamantly, because the Romans saw them as a threat to the culture that they were trying to build. And so they try to kill them. They try to get them out of the government. Now, the important thing is that you don't see the early Christians freaking out about that. They don't seem to be terribly worried about what the politics of the day were. Why? Because they were living for a different kingdom. They believed they were living for the kingdom of heaven. They believed they were citizens of heaven. So even if the world adopted a completely different ideology than theirs, they didn't freak out. Because they were like, well, you know what? The culture is going to believe what they're going to believe. It doesn't change the fact that I believe in God, and my morality is dictated by what God thinks, not what society thinks. And also, when they tried to change people, they didn't try to change people through legislation, through politics, because they understood the role of government isn't to change the heart of man. It's to, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it, it's to restrain the heartless, right? It's to keep people who don't have a changed heart from harming the people that do. It's to keep order and structure within the world. So therefore, when they looked at politics, they said, if I want to change people, it's not going to be through politics, it's going to be through me sharing my faith with them and from them adopting a different mindset and ideology that's not from this world, but is from something else. So they became increasingly evangelistic. This is why the persecuted churches throughout history and even to this day are the most effective churches that have ever existed. To this day, it is not the Christians in America and Western Europe that are the most evangelistic. It's the Christians in China, it's the Christians in the Middle East, and places like that. They're the most evangelistic. They're the ones that are making the most impact on the world around them because of their belief systems, because of the way that they view the world, and that's important for us to understand. How about security? Well, in Psalm 46, the psalmist describes literally an end to even the natural world. And in that statement, he says, very famously, Psalm 46 verse 10, be still and know that I am God. In other words, even when all of society is crumbling down around you, even when everything is going crazy, your security does not come from the government. No matter what's happening in society, your security comes from God. Once again, it's great when the government's on the right page and it's fighting the right people and doing the right things, but you don't have that guarantee. Right? So even if it doesn't, we don't have to freak out. It doesn't mean that your life is going to go down the hill, go down to nothing, right? You do believe that you have a security that goes beyond the walls of this universe, and that is from God himself. Finally, eternal significance. We as Christians don't believe that our significance is through what we can do. We believe it's what God has done. In other words, when you want to value something, what do? You give it a payment, right? You give it a value. You assign it how much it's worth. When God valued your life and mine, he valued it at the cost of his own life. And what's more valuable than the life of God? You're eternally valuable and significant, not because of what you've done. It says in Romans chapter 5 that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. In other words, when you were doing the worst possible things of your life, that's when God died for you. That's when he valued you at that infinite worth. So we're not stressed out about whether or not our actions or our deeds have eternal significance, because we have a significance through faith in God. And that gives us peace, and that gives us stability in the way that we live, in the way that we think, in the way that we believe. So therefore, we can go into this election not necessarily without any amount of worry, but even if we're worried, we have ultimate peace in knowing that God's will is going to be done, he's going to be victorious in the end, and he's the one that gives us the things that our heart truly needs and that are eternally significant. So, therefore, we can respond to our fellow man with love and with gentleness and patience without getting all up into a hullabaloo and accusing people of hating this country and things like that. We're able to be very gentle and very cautious in the way that we communicate, and to be able to pray for whoever's in office, even if we significantly disagree with their views. So I do hope that this video has helped. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below, and look forward to my next video. Thank you guys so much for your support.